Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Elvish. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Genetec, and I'm your host for the first in our Innovate Everyday panel series. I'm very happy you were able to take the time to join us today. I know there's a lot of competing things going on, especially now that we're all working from home. So I'm glad you were able to escape your cat, dog, children for an hour of 45 minutes, I would say, of interesting conversation and thought-provoking discussion. So thank you very much for taking the time. I want to give you a little bit of background about the lecture series. We put together Innovate Every Day so that we could talk about how Genetec and our customers are creating solutions together to move on to the next phase of whatever normal is going to be. And we're going to use this lecture series, which will be continuing on for about 5 weeks, one talk a week, to look at how we're partnering with our customers, how we're working with the broader community to deliver innovative solutions that help us come to grips with the situation we're in now and actually do better than we were doing before and learn something new. And I think you'll find that today's panel session and the experts that we've brought together from Genetec will be able to shed a lot of light on some of the big topics that are going on today. Today we are talking about how innovative technology can protect our privacy now and after COVID-19. There's a lot to be discussed here, and I will tell you ahead of time that we really want your questions. Nothing is off limits. So if you have a question, just type it into the question box over there, and we will be absolutely sure to answer your questions just as best we can. Now, I'm not going to do this alone, and you've heard enough from me, so I would like our 3 experts to come on out and join us. Come on out, guys. Hello, everyone. We have a really excellent group with us today, internal experts from Genetec. Some of you may already know them. With us, we have JP Deby, our commercial lead for buildings and industrials in Europe, based out of Belgium. We have Dr. Florian Matusik, product group director for video analytics. Good afternoon, Florian. And of course, somebody you all know well if you follow the cybersecurity press, Mr. Mathieu Chevalier, our lead security architect at Genetec. So, gentlemen, I'm going to give a chance for you. Give us a little flavor of who you are, what's going on, and let the audience know who you're talking, who they're hearing from today. And I'm going to start because you're right there in my camera screen. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Deby.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So yes, I'm responsible for building industrial markets in Europe. So this is really commercial customers, large multinational customers based in Europe. So obviously, COVID-19, how to get back to work is a big topic for them, and the whole notion of privacy. But also 3 years ago, because time flies. So in 2017, 2018, I was quite involved with the team in Montreal to see how we could manage GDPR, but more importantly, to make sure that our solutions were ready to help our customers meet their GDPR requirements. So that's the privacy angle which I bring on this call today.
Great, thanks very much, JP. Let's head over to beautiful Vienna and hear from Dr. Florian Matusik.
Yes, hi, I'm Florian. As Andrew mentioned, I'm the product group director for video analytics at Genetec. Why am I here? I'm here because I've spent a lot of time on privacy protection in video surveillance, both on the research side as part of my PhD in publications, but also on the product side, of course, and that's part of what I do today. So privacy is near and dear to my heart. So that's why I'm very happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you, Florian. Thanks for taking the time to join us. And of course, last but certainly not least, from here in very warm Montreal, Mathieu Chevalier.
Yes, hi, thank you, Andrew. So my name is Mathieu Chevalier. I'm the head of security engineering at Genetec. So basically, me and my team were taking care of the cybersecurity aspect as well as the privacy aspects for our portfolio of products. So this is the kind of questions and subjects we're dealing with on a daily basis.
Well, it's great. I'm really glad that you can be here because there's so much going on in terms of both cybersecurity and privacy. So I think we have the right people around the table to have a very engaging conversation, but the most important people around this table are those of you who tuned in, and I'm looking at the list and I see people from all over, actually. I'm surprised. I thought we'd have primarily a North American audience. But thank you for taking the time. And again, you're essential to this discussion. If you have a question, write it in the window and we will put it forward to our panelists. But I have a lot of questions to get us started. So maybe I'll get one of your questions right out of the gate. I think most of you noticed this morning, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and the New York Times both put out an article about Russian hacking into COVID-19 vaccine research laboratories. We're starting to see the undermining of trust in our health organizations. The New York Times, with regard to contact tracing apps, said that researchers are reporting privacy and security risks that could affect millions of people and undermine trust in public health efforts. These are some very significant issues that are going on right now that could undermine the entire pandemic response. And a lot of them are tied up with issues of privacy and cybersecurity. So I'm going to start off with you, Mathieu, but JP, Florian, please feel free to jump in. Contact tracing applications and privacy. Is this an either or? Do we have to give something up to have proper contact tracing apps? Or is there a way to do this and still respect privacy? Mathieu.
So no, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. You can have or strive at least to have the best of both worlds. In order for contact tracing to be efficient, you need to have some critical mass. So some experts have said about 60% of your population need to use the application in order for it to be relevant. So it's important that those apps are used, and surveys suggest that people are not that happy to jump into using it. So source diverse, but it's around 50 to 70% of the American population that say that they won't be using a tracing application for COVID, and the main reason being privacy. So it is certainly something you need to discuss and address if you're planning on doing something around privacy. I think the biggest players in the field have already proposed something. I'm talking here about Apple and Google that basically have created an agreement between themselves to have some form of a standard so that they build the foundation for application to be interoperable between those major, mobile providers. And so what's interesting with them is that they really took a privacy-first approach. They really put the user at the center, and you can choose to share or not his data. And so, in fact, they have been criticized in some regards because of this, because the health officials of different countries have found out that they don't share enough of data with them. And so it's limiting in some regards. So we have seen some countries like Singapore, Austria, in the UK, in fact, that publicly said that they will continue with their own application instead of using what is proposed by those two companies because of those limitations.
I think the cultural aspect of this is very interesting, Mathieu, because trust has so much to do with the country you live in and the social norms that you're used to, I wonder if I could throw it over to our European panelists. Maybe JP, you could take a kick at this. What is the response to contact tracing applications in Europe?
Yeah, so it's mixed. I mean, it's mixed, and it's sort of funny. You take Germany and France, for example. I mean, most Europeans will tell you that Germans are really concerned about their privacy, but yet they picked up more on the solution that was developed in Germany than the French did in France. So for me, I mean, I think it's certainly there's a cultural issue. Are people feeling comfortable or not? Although it's sort of funny because I mean, I think that most of us are utilizing Waze. So I mean, we're sort of making ourselves traceable all day long as we drive on roads. But I think that the big issue with trust is communication and explanation. And perhaps the Germans have done a better job than in France, and as a result, reassure a little bit more their citizens about the good of this application.
Yeah, go ahead.
Especially in France, what we have seen is that they adopt this the centralized approach that where many people have doubts that really privacy is protected. Even though it's not easy to explain to a general population, but I think this added to a little bit of mistrust in France. Also, I have to defend my own country. Austria is adopting Google and Apple. France and other countries are not. But I think, yes, as JP mentioned, it's interesting to see different countries, how they approach this and how they can build trust around these applications. I see many in my own field when I talk to people, I see many people that seem to trust big corporations like Apple and Google more than their own governments. And I mean, this is first, it's an interesting statement of the state of our world, that we don't trust our governments, but also we are sharing so much information every day with Google and Apple and many others. I mean, not even talking about TikTok. That we seem to trust these corporations, even though there is not really a basis for it, because they are not so much more transparent than others.
That's interesting. You should bring up TikTok, Florian, because I think in our pre-brief we were discussing the recent, they've been banned from many corporations as potentially an arm of spying of the Chinese Communist Party. Mitchell, is there a parallel between something like TikTok and a contact tracing application?
Yes, you can make some parallels in the sense that TikTok have announced in the term of service that they are tracking the location of their user. That's some things you agree to do when you're using their services, basically. However, we don't really know what they're doing with it. It's not for the purpose of health or something related to COVID, of course. So there is some parallels. The other point about TikTok is more who owns them, right? It's more that they are hosted in China, and there are some questions related around censoring of what is said and maybe disinformation on this platform as well. So there are some similarities, but of course they are not for the same purpose, so it's not exactly the same.
I'd like to put a question to you and to everybody, but I'll start with Mathieu. But is there an issue that the sample size will not be big enough for these contact tracing applications to be functional within the communities that they're supposed to operate in?
Yes, you need to have some critical mass in order for the application to be really useful. Researchers, I've seen different studies, but it's around 60%, it seems. You have some benefits still if you have lower adoption, but if you have, I think, for example, France has like 2% or 3%, well, this is really pretty small.
Yeah, that's disturbing. Do you think one of the things we had discussed is that maybe it may come down to corporations to impose this upon their staff. Is that something that would help drive adoption within a certain community, that if a corporation of employees sort of started using, were mandated to use a contact tracing app?
Well, certainly it would help drive the adoption. However, is it the right thing to do or not? This, I don't know. Like, for example, China, they have a mandatory application for people that be embedded in WePay and Alibaba. And basically it gives you a color code, green, red, and yellow. And you basically need to show your code in order to move around the city. So, you know, this is a lot more invasive than what we have here in the West. So there is certainly pros and cons as well to this approach.
I think one of the cons is that basically you have to trust your employer that they check that your privacy is properly protected, because it's not always easy for an employee to do this voluntarily if their employer is asking them to install it. So in a way, employees would give up their choice to do it themselves. But I agree that that it would definitely drive adoption, and if it's done in a responsible manner, it might help.
Yeah, perhaps a better route would be for the employer to to educate the employees around, let's say, certain traceability technique that they can employ, let's say, within their own facilities, explaining also, let's say, the the economical impact of not doing that. I mean, when you're seeing what happened in some of the the meat transformation companies that be in the US or even in Europe, how you can bring a whole business down. I mean, perhaps this would let people think on a larger scale, how they can positively impact their country. So perhaps it's first educating them what they can do, let's say, on the within their offices in terms of traceability. And then with that, they will better understand, let's say, the value of applying that on a national level, for example.
All three of you have made mention of, education, trust, awareness. Do you feel that there's enough cyber literacy or technological literacy in the broader community to actually appreciate how a contact tracing application could be made to be more private and secure versus other applications? Mathieu, what's your take on this idea?
Of course, from my perspective, which is doing cybersecurity all day, I don't think there is enough literacy around this. I think my field has kind of permeated outside of its own circle and is now more affected, like in the mass media, stuff like that. We can think Twitter yesterday. Remember, like a couple of high-profile accounts were compromised in order basically to exchange Bitcoin for attackers to make money, right? So those are issues that are related to cybersecurity, and so it is a hard topic, honestly. But yes, more literacy will mean more security.
I want to change gears a little bit here, and I want to ask you a question, JP. Certainly, being European in the country that's the seat of the European Union, how is this playing out in relation to privacy regulations? Genetec has a long history of being ahead of the curve on GDPR and the CCPA. How is this colliding with the pandemic right now?
Yeah, so indeed, we're fortunate in Europe to have GDPR. So GDPR doesn't hinder, I would say, some of the measures that are being taken around the the utilization of technology or getting information to combat COVID-19. Because at the end of the day, GDPR is really about how you safekeep this information, and how, as the data controller, the person that captures, let's say, the information, you are responsible for this information. The issues, let's say, that we have seen, so I would say that for the majority of technologies that you're seeing reading in papers, I mean, it's totally in equation with GDPR. The issues is more around certain type of information, especially medical information, where we've seen a lot of concern because it's colliding actually with other regulations. So, for example, labor laws will vary from country to country. GDPR in Europe is a regulation, so it's adopted by the whole of Europe. But labor laws are typically directive, which means that each country has the ability to define a little bit how they want to do things. And as a result, you'll have countries where they'll say, you know, you cannot keep any type of medical record. You have countries where to take a medical measurement, for example, it's a doctor who has to do it. You cannot automate the process. So it's especially around this area that we've seen, let's say, a lot of discussion, where I think audience that have offices across Europe have to be attentive and really, let's say, get the you know, the right information from lawyers or whatever locally to make sure, let's say, that they take the right approach.
Yeah, so being on top of it, being aware of that, and you know, JP, I mean, you're in charge of our buildings and industrial sector. We're hearing a lot about people putting temperature checks at the doors of large facilities, the thermal cameras, which may or may not work. How does that intersect? Like, is there a difference between how they collect the data and what they do with it? Like, how does that work? I'm sure we have people on here who are managing properties. What does that, is there a difference between those two things?
Yes, I mean, again, it comes back, well, so there's a really multiple, you know, topics here. So one of them is the legality for the employer to collect data. So if legally they can, you know, take medical information, then GDPR will step in, where, you know, this will be highly sensitive and they will need to take the right step to protect it. But there's this notion of grabbing the information. I mean, on a wider scale, I would say we see also a lot of companies, you know, coming back to the idea to take temperature in the first place, as, let's say, we, you know, know more and more about, you know, COVID-19 and the fact that, you know, a large percentage of people with COVID not necessarily show signs like temperature and so forth. So what was sort of a, you know, a debate and a big concern in the beginning, I think, is sort of switching now and sort of moving away. I think that people are sort of stepping back from the whole temperature testing as a whole.
I think, I mean, GDPR and other regulations, they do have this concept of a balance of what you're allowed to collect versus why do you need to collect it and what's the use of it, and data minimization. So you're supposed to collect only as much data as you really need for whatever you want to achieve, and not use technology that collects more data if there is a different technology that can achieve the same result. And I think this is also why regulations like GDPR and so on apply to special situations like this and not necessarily have to be rewritten, because they provide this flexibility of collecting data if it's necessary and not if it's not necessary.
So privacy is not an absolute dogma.
Yes. So privacy in the end is a social contract, right? So we define ourselves what we think is our private life or our private data. It meant something totally different 200 years ago or 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. So this is something that's evolving and that we all agree on. But what we have to make sure is that during these special times, we don't throw everything out of the window. We defined and agreed on in recent years, which was a very good development, and GDPR itself is a great revolution. So there is this saying that there is nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. So we shouldn't implement temporary solutions now in the name of COVID that throw all of our privacy principles out of the window. We really have to make sure that we're still considering privacy of people.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And I wonder if we've been, we've conditioned ourselves to over-focus on the economy and reopening the economy and sort of put in jeopardy other considerations, public health being one of them, but certainly also the right to privacy. What's the opinion around the table here? Have we put privacy in jeopardy, and subsumed it to sort of bigger topics? How about I throw that over to you, Florian?
I think we haven't yet. I think it's just natural that if you have a critical situation, that you focus on the most pressing things first. But luckily, at least in many countries, we have institutions that care about privacy and that are raising the flag if something like this is happening. All around the world, of course, the crisis might look different where we don't have this kind of regulation. But I believe in most countries today, we haven't thrown privacy out of the window yet, even though it wasn't on top of people's minds.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're also seeing is that this pandemic is promoting, let's say, the use of the use of technology that might be new to a lot of people, but which is not necessarily new, to the market. So if you look at your back to office strategy, you will see that most of you will try to reutilize sensors that you might have, information that you might have from your access control system, for example, because you do gather data, about people coming to work, going through doors. So it's all of this information is being utilized already today, under GDPR regulation, under data privacy regulation. It's just that it's being respin a little bit for another usage, which is traceability, for example, of with which colleagues you might have been in contact 3 days ago when you were in the office, and perhaps it's those aspects which are new to the public rather than the technology and the data itself.
That's a very astute observation, JP. I wonder, as we start to see this happening and we start seeing more proactive measures happening, we're certainly seeing an explosion of the number of sensors that are being deployed into action to help us, manage COVID-19. And this could be temperature sensors, more cameras, more. With all of these sensors out there, is this making privacy and privacy protection a more topic of discussion? Florian, we'll pass that to you.
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, technology right now in the times of reopening can provide lots of benefits, as GP mentioned. Many of our customers or users already have technology that can help them to reopen. We will talk about this more in the other panels, of course, but one of the great examples is how one of our hospital customers is utilizing video for nurses not to go into the room, so they don't have to switch their PPE and so on. So that's a great example of how existing technology can help you during these times of reopening. But yeah, so what I would encourage any user is to look at what they have today and what technology exists there today, because this is proven. There, you also know, in the privacy perspective, you know very well how to utilize it and what it does in the background, and it's not a new solution. Of course, there are new solutions as well when we think about mask detection or social distancing, but those are really very new, and we don't know yet exactly how they work and how what their benefit is. No matter which technology you're using, you should still see that you apply this principle of data minimization that I mentioned before. So if I go back to the example of the hospital where you're recording patients, so the first thing you should do is, if you don't need it, don't record the video. For this use case, you don't need to record video, so don't store the data, because this is very private information. Of course, there's other ways as well. I mean, we have a great technology that protects privacy in video where they're pixelated, And there are some other solutions as well. So you can use existing technology, just make sure that that people's privacy are still respected.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's interesting because more sensor means more data, right? So data minimization is kind of an uphill battle. It could be seen as, from a developer standpoint of view, like I will have more data, I'll collect it all, and I'll see if something useful can be done with it later on. So that might be one way of looking at it, but it's certainly not the optimal way from privacy-wise. Privacy is not absolute, like there is a trade-off to do, but privacy is a social need, right? It's a human need. It's uniquely human in what's differentiate us in the end.
Yeah. No, and perhaps in that respect, I mean, I think it's important. It says you start to think about perhaps some additional investment to also think a little bit more in the future, because I mean, hopefully we'll get over this COVID-19 quickly, and to see if that investment, this ability to grab data, has still, let's say, the right level of proportion between the good that it might bring to your organization or to your city or whatever, you know, versus you know, the right to privacy. Because obviously the fact that COVID-19 might will hopefully leave in a year from now or 6 months or whatever, it's going to redo, let's say, a little bit the balance, you know, between, you know, what is the right amount of data that you can grab, you know, versus, let's say, the situation that you're trying to manage.
Good point, JP. And I like this discussion around, you know, thinking towards the future. You know, when we were discussing, you know, the pre-call around things like facial recognition, Florian, I believe it was you that, you know, talked about how we set regulations, and maybe it's more about regulating the use of the technology rather than the actual tech. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you had a really great point in the pre-brief.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is really facial recognition, and regulating it is a pre-pandemic topic. So maybe we will have a like a pre-pandemic, post-pandemic way of talking. This is a pre-pandemic topic where we saw last year already that lots of regulations are being prepared in order to limit facial recognition, especially in the US on a state level. Also in Europe, of course, and many big technology companies putting a moratorium on facial recognition themselves until we all figured this out. And just today in the morning, I read about another lawsuit happening in the US. So I think those are important trends, because this is especially a technology that has great uses, but a huge potential of misuse. So this is an area where it's good to regulate, and where we should regulate. What I'm personally a little bit cautious or afraid of is that we will make a quick fix to regulate the technology, facial recognition, and not regulate the use of it or the application. Because if you regulate facial recognition today, you won't cover other things that are coming tomorrow. I mean, the next thing that's really right at the door right now is gait recognition, where you identify people by the way they walk. And after this, there will be the next thing. And of course, you can identify people by their phones and track them and so on. So what you should regulate is really identifying people if they don't know about it or are not agreeing to it, and tracking people. And it should be independent of the technology you're using.
That's a really good point. And I guess the thing is we don't know really, and lawmakers and policymakers may not know what's coming, and if they make their policies too restrictive, they're actually going to over-limit themselves in terms of that policy.
Yeah.
In terms of policy, and Mathieu, I'm going to pass this over to you. And then just as a note to the audience, I'm going to, we have several questions already from the audience, but I encourage you to all send in your questions. Mathieu, I want to ask you a question about policy, and it goes back to sort of technological literacy. How do we know, you know, we talked about Google and Apple and their contact tracing apps. How do we know that they're not using that to sort of target ads to us, or, you know, individually identifies it? Is that something that we should be concerned about?
Well, Yes. Like we don't know except if what they tell us. So there is a trust question here. Basically, we trust that they are transparent in the way that they use our data, share it. So we're trusting them in some regards around this. We know it's kind of their business model, to know their user, know them well, so that they can sell targeted ads around this. The question of targeted ads, however, it's kind of broader from an internet context, because this is tracking you everywhere. It's not just Google, but those different hundreds of companies that we don't even know the name of that are also able to do this, and for which we don't know how they manage this, how they manage our data, what they do with it. So more light, more focus on those issues would be helpful from the internet perspective today.
Great. Okay, well, we have a really interesting question related to facial recognition from somebody in the audience who I imagine might be from my home province of Quebec here, but that, the question is that face covering was such a big topic in North America and Quebec in particular prior to COVID-19. Lots of bans coming out around facial coverings and stuff like that. And now we are seeing the opposite, where face masks are rightly being mandated for people to wear for health reasons. How is that going to impact the algorithms from things like facial recognition, even on your phone? How do we get around that?
So I can speak to the technical part. I mean, virtually all the providers that you see out there with that do facial recognition, they claim that it's not really impacting the algorithms, which I don't think is the case completely. It will probably somehow work, but what we are already seeing is the first providers that are taking a different approach to facial recognition and just focusing on recognizing people by their eye features, that are not taking anything else into consideration in order to overcome this issue. So I'm pretty sure there will be technological solutions to overcome this. Of course, that's the technological answer, and not about if face covering is good or bad, which is more political, I would say.
Maybe we don't need to wade into that argument. I'm not sure how it became politicized, but it did. So we have another question about legislation for social good being put in place now that may not have a proper sunset clause. And it goes to your point, Florian, of nothing is more permanent than a temporary solution. How do we ensure that we don't, create knee-jerk policies and implement something that we may not be able to get out of? JP, I'm going to throw that to you.
Whew, that's a tough question there. I mean, if we come back to to data privacy, again in Europe, and I'm not too familiar, let's say, around some of the regulations across the world, but I think that the guidelines are already sort of set, and this is why, for example, we're talking about face recognition, where it's been banned in Belgium last year. So the policy needs to be needs to be able to to work with a lot of different cases, and I think that with GDPR the balance was correctly struck, where again there needs to be this analysis, this continuous analysis, that whatever you put in place first and foremost has value for what you're trying to achieve. Let it be to protect your your property, for example, but also that you need to ensure that you don't have, let's say, a better method or a less intrusive method to achieve, let's say, the same objective. So this is where we are lucky, I would say, in in Europe, to have GDPR in place, because I think with those sort of major lines, we can guide a lot of the new technologies that are going to come our way, or the utilization of those technologies coming our way for the coming years.
Great. Sorry, go ahead, Florian.
No, I just wanted to add to that in not so much not only about privacy, but in times of crises, basically we get what we elected some years ago. So there's nothing as a civilian, there's not much you can do right now, but it's more about after the pandemic, we will see many countries, and I see it already in my own country of Austria, that the oppositions in parliament are questioning certain decisions by the government, and there will be a lot of discussions and checks, and it might be that some things will be reversed afterwards that turned out to be bad decisions. So there will be a certain democratic process around this that might regulate afterwards.
Yes, it's a good point, and it makes me think about an article in the Wall Street Journal about this happening in Canada. Basically, Trudeau's government was issuing an emergency bill at the beginning of the COVID, which was asking basically sweeping powers to tax and spend without parliamentary approval until the end of 2021. So this bill didn't pass because the Conservative opposition in that case was against it. So we reworked it and make it less long and more constrained. But the solution, basically, to your question, Andrew, is that you have some other counter forces in place that would limit those bad policies in the long term. There were some power grabs that were effective, that were using COVID as an excuse, and I'm thinking about Hungary, Israel in some regards, in Philippines, for example, where the political context was already maybe less healthy, and so suspending election without sunset clause, for example, happened in Hungary, and the reason was COVID emergency.
And I mean, just as a point, the Patriot Act that was implemented during 9/11, it's still in effect, right? So these things have a habit of hanging around a little bit longer than perhaps they need to. Mathieu, a question for you that's coming during, and I mentioned it at the beginning about the Russian hacking. Is this a time when we're seeing a greater focus on state-sponsored hacking because the stakes are so high? Should cities, municipalities, corporations be more concerned about hacking, phishing attempts in this period especially?
Yes, we have seen geopolitical actors using COVID as kind of as a tool to destabilize their rival. So this was seen, and I think it was in the Eastern Europe, for example, there were fake news about infected Chinese people coming in, and this caused riots in the streets because citizens didn't want this to happen. I think it was Czech Republic, if I remember correctly. And so, yes, we see this as a tool that nation states are using, certainly. So in terms of turmoil, everything is good for destabilizing your rivals. Yes.
Interesting. There's some fairly big elections coming up this year. It's a bad timing from a number of perspectives, I would say.
Yes.
We have one last question. Is it, are they, from a corporate perspective, is it just hacking into the corporations for data, or is it for money? What is the reason why this hacking is taking place?
Well, it depends on the motivation of the threat actor, of the attacker. So cyber criminal, it's always about money, right? So the Twitter hack of yesterday, this was about money. The threat actors that are nation states, this really depends on their agenda. So Russia, for example, they looks like they just like to create chaos. They like to destabilize their rival, and so typically when a subject is divisive, they will push both sides at the same time so that opinions become more polarized. That's what we did in 2016 for the US election, for example. So yes, it depends.
Great. Worrying stuff. Well, we're almost at time, gentlemen, so I'm going to ask you for your parting thoughts for our audience before they continue on with their afternoon. JP, final thought you want to share with our audience today?
Yeah, so for me, data privacy is a lot about education and being transparent and explaining, a little bit to your community or to your employees. What do you do? Why do you do it? And how long you will do it? So I can only encourage you to be very transparent, because that's how you will build trust over time.
Excellent parting words. Florian?
Yeah, maybe I want to drive home the point that yes, technology can be a great tool to reopen your business, but make sure you don't collect more information than you have to. Be sure to be transparent, as JP said, and explain why you're utilizing which technology and for which use. I think then we have great solutions that help us to reopen, but that also protect our privacy.
Excellent. And last word to you, Mr. Chevalier.
Yes, so we have been told that security and privacy are often don't come together. They are a fundamental dichotomy, but that is a false one. Security is not always a trade-off to privacy, and if we make the right choices, it is possible to have the best trade-off between those two worlds.
Well, an excellent place to leave the discussion, understanding that security and privacy is not a zero-sum game. Thank you for that, Mitchell, and thank you to all of our panelists and our audience today. And remember, coming up, we have 4 more excellent get-togethers of Genetec experts and our partners. Next week, we'll be talking about physical security innovations on July 21st. August 4th, we'll be meeting with our great partners, HID and Quanergy, to talk about how we're working with our partners to deliver compelling solutions during the pandemic period. August 18th, I'm especially interested because we're going to be talking about identity as the new perimeter, which is a very, very interesting topic. And finally, on August 26th, we are going to be diving into machine learning and making sense of data during this period. And we'll actually be lucky, and we will have Dr. Sean Lawler, Genetec's chief data scientist, join us. And I believe that you're going to be joining us on that one too. So it's going to be a PhD extravaganza. So thank you everyone for joining us. Remember to innovate every day and stay in touch with Genetec. If you have any questions after this, just email us. We'd love to hear from you. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.